Hello guys and welcome back. It is officially NHL trade deadline week, one of the best times of the year. And on top of the trade deadline stream we'll be doing on Friday, we also got a ton of content coming to you throughout the week. Today, we are going to be predicting the entire deadline to see where every big player could end up going. We got some spicy takes on which players will be dealt or not, and which teams will go full sell and full buy. Everything you need to know right here, right now. So make sure you watch till the end for my full predictions and all the latest NHL trade rumors, and of course hit that subscribe button for more hockey and trade rumor content just like this all throughout the year. Doesn't just stop on deadline day. Now, before we get to the predictions, I first want to share with you guys my sleeper fantasy picks for tonight. We got a bunch of different ones, and if you guys don't know, sleeper fantasy is the best way to turn your hockey knowledge into payday. And of course, when you guys sign up using promo code GRAB on your first deposit, you can get this Chris Chelios signed jersey, which we're giving away, which is one heck of a deal. And for my picks tonight, we got 5 different ones. And again, if you guys hit, you'll be able to win so much money with sleeper. And of course, all you guys got to do is pick more or less on different players. And we got 5 players locked in tonight. I got Roslovic, more than 1.5 shots on goal. He has gotten more than 1.5 shots in his last 10 games. It's pretty much automatic. Same thing with Matias Bocelli, higher than 5 points. He's on a 6-game point streak. He has been electric as of late. I also got Evan Rodrigues, more than 1.5 shots on goal. In his last 12, he's only gotten less than 2 in 2 of the games, so he has also been on fire. And also Connor McDavid, more than an assist in tonight's game, more than 0.5 assists. I mean, he, in his last 11, has an assist in every single game, another automatic one. And then last but not least, Wyatt Johnston getting a point versus the San Jose Sharks. To me, I've been riding high on Johnston for a while. He has been electric as of late as well. And even though he was scoreless in his last game, I think he's going to get some revenge versus San Jose and get a big one here. But we're going to lock it in here, see how it goes. If you want to make your own NHL picks, again, go in the description, click on the link, sign up to Sleeper Fantasy, and use promo code GRAB. You'll enter the jersey giveaway and be able to win big with Sleeper. Win-win. Now let's get started today with the predictions for the deadline. There are so many different things floating around, but I want to put my predictions out while everything is still fresh, while we still got time and a few days to go until the deadline. And these are where I think every major player will go. There are a lot of options here, but thankfully a lot of teams have a lot of cap space to work with this year, and it kind of has opened up a lot of options. Now, I first wanted to go over the players that I think won't get traded this deadline, because I think there's a lot of guys for very good reasons that will stay with their teams in the end. First, I'm going to go with Vladimir Tarasenko of the Ottawa Senators. There has kind of been a lot of fluctuation in whether he'll get dealt or not, but considering how big of a locker room piece he has been for Ottawa, I could see them re-signing him in the end. And with how much he seems to like the Ottawa area and like the team, like the situation, I think he could be back for next year. First, some other names have been thrown out there. Trevor Zegras is not being traded, at least not right now. If we do see a deal, it'll be in the offseason. Scott Laughton, same thing. I think the asking price that Philly is going to have is just going to be way too much for teams to handle. Anthony Mantha, I think a lot of this comes down to cap hit. That $5.7 million is going to be tough to move, and I think a lot of contenders that need the position he's at will go for cheaper options. Mikael Granlund, kind of the same thing, but I think also San Jose might want to keep him. Mike Hoffman, I just don't think playoff teams are going to value what he brings, nor should they. Jason Zucker, kind of along the same thing, but also considering the cap hit as well at 5.3. I just don't think Arizona is going to get a big offer for him, maybe like a 4th round pick, but it would be pretty pennies, honestly. You also got Alexander Carrier. I think Nashville's position right now in the playoffs is going to have them keeping a lot of guys, Carrier among them. I don't think Jacob Chychrun is going to be dealt this deadline. Maybe an offseason trade, but that would be the earliest I would expect it. And then David Savard, kind of the same thing. They don't need to trade him. He has another year left on his deal, and I just don't think that Montreal's going to get a lot of value for him right now. And then on the goaltending, Elvis Merzlikins has requested a trade, but I just don't think it's going to happen yet. Jacob Markstrom, same thing. I think an offseason deal involving New Jersey is a sure thing, but I just don't think it happens at the deadline. Jake Allen, I think the price might just be too high for Montreal and what they're asking for. And considering at this stage what he is, I just don't think a lot of teams value him as a backup. And also, Capo Caco is not being dealt. Sorry. Now let's go on to the players that I think will actually be dealt at this year's deadline. Let's start out with maybe the biggest trade piece of the market, and I think it will actually be Jake Guentzel of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, in last week's video, we talked about bold predictions for the deadline and how I thought Pittsburgh might actually buy at this year's deadline, but the last couple losses have been so bad that I think it's taken Pittsburgh out of that race completely. I think Guentzel will be dealt, and the team that I think will get him will be the Vegas Golden Knights. points. Now, yes, this is the easy prediction to make, but at the same time, I think it'll be the right one. With Vegas having all this added space with the Markstrom LTIR, they have $7.2 million to work with, and I think are one of the few contenders out there in on Guentzel that wouldn't have to retain salary. You could add him immediately to your left side and then have Barbashev onto the second line and create a lot more diversity within that lineup. And especially if Markstrom isn't going to come back for the playoffs, they need to add on the wing. They need to add somebody there. Guentzel will be an incredible piece. The only really thing holding this back is that it seems like Pittsburgh wants more prospects instead of picks, but I do think Vegas still has a few guys available. Maybe it centers around David Edstrom, maybe a Lucas Cormier, something like that I think could get it done. Next up, let's go on to perhaps the biggest trade piece on the defensive side of this year's deadline, and that is Noah Hanifin. Although Calgary has already traded Zadorov and Chris Tanev, Hanifin is really the big piece. It seems like he won't be staying with the Calgary Flames, and the Flames do still have a lot of leverage here, which is why I think they'll get a pretty good trade package back. As for who they'll end up trading him to, really all signs point to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it makes a lot of sense, honestly. When you look at that defense, they could use somebody on that left side and really on that entire defense. I mean, Hayden Fleury has gotten the job done okay, but I think Tampa really needs to add a top 4D. It's almost an essential for them to take that next step in the playoffs this year, and Hanifin will be a pretty good fit. I've seen people say that Tampa doesn't have really any assets to offer, which I think is underrating them. Isaac Howard, to me, would be the big piece of the deal. He's been fantastic for Michigan State this year, was great at the World Juniors for the U.S. as well. And really the only thing complicating a deal is that Tampa doesn't have a first rounder until 2026, but I still think in the end, they're going to find a way to work it out. Next up, let's go on to Riley Smith. We already talked about Guentzel as a Penguins winger getting dealt, but I think Riley Smith is almost even more likely. It seems like he's kind of tuned out of Pittsburgh and will likely go to a contender. And for a team needing a middle six scoring punch that could be decent on the power play, I think he could be really valuable. The team that I see getting him in the end is actually the Boston Bruins. To me, they make a lot of sense, especially as a team that could use some bulk on that left side, not really in terms of physical play, but just some added juice. To me, he could be on that first line. He could work out pretty well there. Whatever Boston wants to do, it just gives them more options at the end of the day. And I think on offense, that's what they need. Next up, let's go on to Sean Walker, and to me, he's kind of interesting. We've seen a lot of teams named, a lot of teams mentioned, but I honestly think Sean Walker could go to a little bit of a dark horse in this race. I was kind of contemplating Colorado, a team that I haven't seen a lot of people mention, maybe needing a third pair D. Sean Walker could be interesting on that right side. But I think ultimately, I think he'll end up with the Detroit Red Wings. It feels like they need some more defensive depth, and they just need a defenseman, an upgrade in general. And I think Sean Walker would be great in that aspect. You can maybe put him on that second pair, whether it be on the left or right side, moving down maybe a Petrie or a Sherratt, and maybe scratching an Amada in the process. I think for Detroit, the problem is they just got a lot of mid on that defense, all the same type of player. And I think for Detroit needing an upgrade, I think a player like Walker could be pretty strong. And also considering how many picks Detroit has, I think it could be a pretty great fit. Next up, we go on to Adam Henrique. And this is a player that's been having the asking price of a first round pick. We'll see if that actually ends up being the case. But to me, one team that has always made a lot of sense for Henrique's services is actually the Florida Panthers. To me, I think the Panthers make a ton of sense here, especially with Henrique. I feel like he might be in a bad spot if he's solely relied upon to be the third line center. I think in Florida, he doesn't need to be. He could play on the left wing. If he works out at center, you could have him replace Anton Lindell there. But if he's just a left wing, you could put him immediately in Nick Cousins' spot and I think get some pretty good results. But I think Florida might be looking for some veteran presences on that bottom six. Henrique would be perfect and bring a lot of experience that Florida has, but would have even more of with Henrique on the team. Next up, we go on to Tyler Toffoli, which is another player that's been recently coming up in trade rumors. And with New Jersey slide in the standings, it makes complete sense. Being a player that isn't re-signed after this season at a $4.2 million cap hit, he's a pretty reasonable guy for the offense that he can put up. And sure, there are some major defensive deficiencies this season for New Jersey, but he's still in 60 games, 26 goals, 44 points, and in an offensive role could do a lot for a contender. To me, we talked about it in the bold predictions, but I still think LA could make a lot of sense. You could put him on the left wing, you could maybe even put him on the right wing, and maybe even, again, have some more balance within that top nine. I think this is a team that could use some juice, and even though they've been playing a little bit better as of late, they could use that extra jump, and I think New Jersey and LA could work pretty well together here. Next up, we go on to Nick Dowd, which seems to be one of the most expensive fourth-line centers of all time, it looks like. But I think there are going to be teams going after him because even though he is the fourth-line center, he's one heck of a good one and has been fantastic for Washington this season. and in 45 games, 15 points. The defensive acumen, though, is what you're getting him for, and again, that results that he'll likely put up in the playoffs defensively. To me, the team that makes the most sense, we've already talked about them going after Riley Smith, but to me, it's the Boston Bruins. I think we could see them maybe upgrade at the center position, and again, maybe upgrade on Boquist for that fourth-line center spot. To me, that would be perfect, bringing some defensive acumen and some wherewithal that I think Boston could use in that bottom six. And even though you might be a little bit expensive, I think Boston is going to want to upgrade that forward group a little bit. Next, we go on to Pavel Buchnevich, who might actually be the biggest forward available at this year's trade deadline, as he should be. I mean, you see what he's been able to do with St. Louis over the past few years, just hovering around that point per game rate, being a brilliant top six winger for them. He is going to be a fantastic addition for anybody that goes after him. And just like the Tyler Toffoli LA connection, I'm going to stick with some of my bold predictions and say the New York Rangers will actually make it happen and trade for Buchnevich in the end. I think they're going to want a right wing upgrade. I think Buchnevich makes so much sense to what the team needs and what he could bring as an upgrade there on that potential first line. Of course, already has experience in New York. The only thing here that could change things is if he kind of has a sour relationship with New York in the end, but I think in terms of pure team fit, it just makes so much sense, man. Next, we go on to Frank Vatrano, which reportedly has an astronomical trade price, but considering his cap hit and also the extra year on his deal, it makes sense why Anaheim would be reluctant to trade him or would want a big haul for him, which I think leads me to believe that a team that, again, wants some more future proofing would trade for Vatrano in the end. And considering what he can do, he'd be an excellent top six addition for anybody. 48 points in 61 games this year. But the team that makes the most sense is the Nashville Predators to me. A team that could use a big upgrade, not just this year, but in the future on the wings. And you could put him immediately behind Philip Forsberg on that left side, and I think work out pretty well. And he's not a pure rental for Nashville, which I think is big for them, but they're still trying to compete. They're still trying to get better. I think a player like Vatrano makes a lot of sense, would bring some good speed to them, and on the playoffs could put up some pretty good numbers too, I think. And in Nashville's system would, again, not just be for this year, but next, which I think is big for the Preds. Now we go on to one of the more fascinating players of this entire deadline, and that is Max Pacioretty, who seemingly has come out of nowhere to become a deadline commodity. And considering what he's done in Washington this year, when he's been healthy, he's actually been pretty solid for them. Only 3 goals, but 15 points in 25 games, and in an offensive role could be pretty interesting for a contending team. The thing is, considering his cap hit, he's not too expensive at $2 million, but the team that I see really wanting to go after him is actually the St. Louis Blues. Now, I don't see them being a super big buyer at this year's deadline, Pacioretty really only being the main one, but I think they will want to get a bigger veteran presence on that bottom six if they were to make this playoff push, and I think they still want to put themselves in it and give them a chance to succeed. Now we go into Nick Seeler, who is one of the more underrated defensemen in this entire deadline. Even though he's got a lot of talk, he's a guy that, especially with that low cap hit at $775K, is going to be a hot commodity for those teams closer to the cap, as he should be. He's been fantastic defensively over these past couple of years for Philly and has proved himself in that role in that middle pair. To me, the team that makes the most sense, for sure, is the Edmonton Oilers, a team that I think could really add to that defense. And even though there has been a lot of talk about potentially trading a CC for AD, I think in this deal, it's a lot more likely that Kulak goes instead in this deal. Likely a Kulak for Seeler swap. You would likely have to add, if you're Edmonton, maybe a second-round pick or something like that to make it work. But I do think it would have to be something like that, where Edmonton could also get rid of some cap too, and that would be humongous for them. And also getting an upgrade in Seeler for that bottom pair will be massive. Now we go into Alex Wennberg, who we also talked about as a potential trade deadline piece, who has been getting a lot of traction as of late, has actually been held out over the past couple of games due to trade-related reasons, and it makes sense. For Seattle, there's not really much of a reason to keep onto him, but as maybe a decent defensive centerman on that third line, I think he could be really interesting for a lot of teams. As we talked about a little bit before, the team that makes the most sense to me is definitely the New York Rangers. We've heard about Chris Drury going for it. Buchnevich and Wennberg would be really going for it. And I think Wennberg, even if you want to have him as a fourth-line center, honestly, you give up a third-round pick. In the Rangers position, you need to make some big additions with that way they've been playing. And I think Wennberg and Buchnevich will be exactly what the doctor ordered. Next up, we go to Anthony Duclair, and for a team that's looking for some speed and potentially some scoring off the wing, Duclair could be really interesting in maybe a third-line role, and we talked about Colorado a little bit before. I think they're going to go after Dumbo. I think they could also go after Duclair as well, potentially maybe putting Wood to the second line, maybe a player like Duclair on that third-line spot. It would give Colorado more options, and also considering the center, which we'll get into, that they're going to be acquiring, I think it could be pretty interesting, these two guys together. We'll get into that in a second. Next, we go on to Jordan Eberle, and the more I think about it, the more I actually think the Carolina Hurricanes could end up being a fit. Now, we talked about Buchnevich a little bit with Carolina before, which I think would also be a great fit, but I think they'll lose out on Buchnevich to the Rangers, which might make Carolina a little bit desperate. Now, we could see them maybe going after a center. I think that might be a possibility with just how disappointing Kotkaniemi has been this season for them. But I do think they'll still more likely go for a wing with Eberle's experience and potential scoring punch, even though it hasn't been there this season. I think it could be still a solid addition, though maybe not solving the problems completely that I think Carolina still has. Now going on to the last, I guess, major player that will be traded at this year's deadline, I got Alex Kerfoot. Now, major is a very subjective thing, and I'm not sure Kerfoot really qualifies as that. But 35 points in 61 games for Arizona this year. I actually didn't even realize how good that production was. But I think we've seen Colorado sniffing around a lot of centermen. But I do think Kerfoot will be the guy they eventually get in the end. They, of course, have had him before. They know this player. And I'm not sure he'll completely fix their center problems. But I think Colorado is in a position where they're not in a position where it feels like they're going to be buying some of these major guys. And I think they might miss out on Henrique as well, which will leave them with very little options. I think a player like Kerfoot could be fine in the role, but even though he's not what Colorado needs, in my opinion, he could at least alleviate it a little bit. He'll put a band-aid on it, that's for sure. But that is it for my trade deadline predictions for this year. It's gonna be absolutely crazy over these next few days, so I hope you stick with us on the channel. But I want to know in the comments down below, what did you guys agree? What did you guys disagree with my predictions? Where do you see all these guys going in the end? Let us know all your thoughts. Are there a surprise player that ends up getting dealt? Let us know, folks. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and share the video of all the hockey fans you guys know to get the predictions out to them, and click on this card for all my predictions right in one playlist. And I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic hockey day, and I will see ya. Goodbye.